Cui Tu, Thoughts at the Road to the 3 Bar on New Year's Eve. On the endless road to the 3 Bar, I've come 10,000 perilous miles. Snow lingers on the mountains here and there. Spring will find me stranded in this alien place. The further I am from my flesh and blood, the more I turn to my servant boy. With all this aimless drifting, how can I face tomorrow's beginning of another year? So, moving on, this is one of 2 poems included in this anthology by Cui Tu. And like the poems that we've been reading lately, those of Madai, Zhang Qiao, and the ones we will be reading in the following days, Cui Tu is a poet from the very late Tang dynasty, at the time in which the dynasty was in massive crisis, experiencing horrible rebellions, civil war, and, general disasters. We don't know much about Cui Tu. We know that he was born around 850. He took the examinations in 881, and he took them in Chengdu, in Sichuan, because the emperor, the Shizong emperor, had to abandon Chang'an, the capital, because of the Huangqiao rebellion, which raged in the country in the 870s, 880s, and sacked and took the 2 imperial capitals, Luoyang and Chang'an. In 881 he took the exams, he failed, passed them in 888, and nothing else is really known about his life. So this poem of Cui Tu's, from the title, it's pointing us at, it's giving us a geographical area, the road to the 3Bar, and the time of the year, New Year's Eve. So it gives us 2 pillars, a time and a space in which the poem is going to take place. The 3Bar is a region in the area of Sichuan, in the very high course of the Yangtze River. So this is the area, part of the area of Sichuan, which, if you will remember, when we talked about the Anglushan rebellion and Emperor Xuanzong having to flee to the old land of Shu, that is the modern Sichuan, this is an area that is landlocked by mountains, and that is an area in which emperors and other people in times of danger and crisis tended to go and to find refuge. In fact, this area of Shu, after the collapse of the Tang dynasty, would be the area of a successor state, which would be relatively prosperous and the one with the greatest continuity with the Tang dynasty with the Tang or before the fall. So we have a road taking us to this mountainous, rugged landscape. And we have a time of the year, New Year's Eve. Now, New Year is always an important celebration in East Asia. It's a time when people get together with the family and when they have some days off. So it's a festivity that connects us with family, and which is a very important topic for all Confucian scholar officials, as you well know. But also, of course, being New Year and New Year's Eve, it evidently is a seasonal festivity that always evokes speculations about the future. The main topic of this poem, which takes place and which includes resonances about typical elements of New Year's, speculating about the future, but also other elements about maybe the 3Bar, although we don't get any landscape description in detail, except perhaps in one line of the region of Ba. The main topic of the poem is the traveler. The poetic persona of Cui Tu, who is the protagonist of this poem, is traveling. Remember, a traveling poetry is always pessimistic and dark in Chinese poetry. Traveling is always presented as, a little bit of a minor disaster, sometimes a necessary disaster, but something that a scholar official always loathes. Traveling takes him away from his roots, and Chinese philosophy and values in the traditional age valued roots above all else, family above all else. Even the political articulation of the empire was seen, with the family metaphor. The emperor is the father of the people. And the Confucian philosophy that the scholar officials were so fond of emphasized that family is the cornerstone proper behavior in the family, respect to the family, is the foundation of everything. So scholar officials loathed being on the roads because they were far from their family, and from a more materialistic or cynical point of view, being far from the capital in the provinces meant being far away from the circles of power where a scholar official could achieve success and prestige, and being far from other scholar officials whose company and cultured conversation one might enjoy. So traveling is always presented under a dark perspective, and it's no other case here. The emphasis on the hardships on the road, the hardships of the weather, the loneliness, the uprootedness, all of these appear in the poem that we have just read. So before we start couplet by couplet, I would just like to say I think this poem allows us for two levels of interpretation. I don't know what the background of this poem is. On its face value, it's just a poem about Cui Tu traveling to the area of the Three Ba and feeling alone and lonely, far from his family and friends, and speculating about the future. Taking into account the historical circumstances in which Cui Tu wrote, it's not unlikely to imagine that he probably wrote this poem while going to the area of Sichuan at the time of massive civil war and destruction of the capitals by Huan Chao and his rebels. And one might imagine that his preoccupations about the future are also, or can be read as preoccupations about the future of the country and the dynasty, which was effectively on the verge of collapse. It was only going to survive, and practically in name only, for a couple of decades more until 907. Okay then, so couplet by couplet. First couplet. On the endless road to the Three Ba, I've come 10,000 perilous miles. So the first couplet positions us with the poetic persona as a traveler. He is following an endless road to the Three Ba. We don't know exactly which road would this be. Is it a road up the Yangtze River, or is it the typical road into Shu through the northeast in the direction of Shanghai, the capital? Probably the southern road, I imagine. So it's an endless road, a very long road. Travelers always speak of the hardships, of the length of the path they are taking. And the poet says he's come 10,000 perilous miles. So 10,000 could be a bit of a hyperbole, so it's an image, but it's a lot of miles of walking. So a long walk through hard terrain is what the first couplet transmits us. The poem says on the endless road to the Three Ba, but in Chinese they don't use prepositions much, so it's not clear in what direction the traveler is traveling. In this translation, and in most of the ones I've consulted, he is traveling to the Three Ba, but I've seen at least one translation where he is traveling from the Three Ba. But anyway, he is moving in that direction or from that direction, and he has been walking for a long, long time. Second couplet. Snow lingers on the mountains, here and there. Spring will find me stranded in this alien place. So the second couplet is the most descriptive, you could say. Remember, the old land of Shu is a landlocked land. It's surrounded by mountains and high river gorges, and then it has a big plain in the inside. So probably getting into the land of Shu, into the area of the Three Ba, there will be mountains, and even though it's the end of the year, if it's New Year's Eve, we must be in very late winter, close to spring. Maybe it's early spring, because in the Chinese New Year the calendar was designed for starting with spring, although it was generally not very well synchronized because of having to connect the lunar and the solar calendar at the same time. So we might imagine that we're in very early spring. Snow lingers on the mountains, so it's still the mantle of winter snow is still holding its grip on some of the mountains. Spring, which is about to begin or beginning, will find me stranded in this alien place. Again, the focus is on the traveler being far from home. This is an alien place. And in fact, the area of some of the areas of Shu, including probably the area of the Three Ba, were not too civilized by the Tang Dynasty. They were still only partly Sinicized areas, so they have an added plus of exoticity and of strangeness for a Chinese from the Middle Kingdom, from the more civilized and Sinicized lands of the East. Third couplet. So the third couplet moves, it's the second parallelistic couplet, it moves more to the feelings of loneliness that the poet is experiencing. And these feelings are represented through a contrast that is very well adapted to the parallelistic and antithetic nature of a parallelistic couplet. The further I am from my flesh and blood, the more I turn to my servant boy. So the poet is far from his family, far from the area where his family is. So in a very human development, he gets closer to the servant that is traveling with him. Humans need affection. If one can't express one's affection towards one's relatives and friends, one will express it towards, anybody, including the people you have near, in this case, a servant boy. Interesting, in some translations, the character for servant boy that is used here is also used as the name for an ethnic non-Chinese group that was in the regions of the empire. I'm not sure if in the Three Bar region. So perhaps he is actually saying, or at least there is a double implication, that the poet is feeling closer towards a servant boy, or the poet is feeling closer even to the barbarians that live in this wilderness, in this wild place. So, there's a big contrast between family and barbarians, the Chinese and the non-Chinese. Feeling so alone because of being a traveler for so long, he might be able to empathize and to feel close even to barbarians. And finally, the last couplet synthesizes as usual and projects us into the future and connects with the New Year's Eve element of the title, which until now has only made a very indirect presence through that evocation of the spring that will find Cui Tu in this alien land. With all this aimless drifting, how can I face tomorrow's beginning of another year? So the contrast is very clear. It says, I am a drifter. I've been long a drifter. I am in a foreign land with foreign people. So how can what can my attitude be towards the new year? Remember, the new year, as I said at the beginning, is a celebration in which families get together. Even today in China, during the Chinese New Year, millions, and I mean millions of people, travel from one end of China to the other to go back to their home places and to their families. And it's one of the few extended holidays, must be a week or so, that the Chinese get now, and I imagine that the Chinese got at this time. So it's the special time of the year to be with the family. Not being with the family would be particularly depressing. Being on the road at this time of year would be particularly depressing for Cui Tu. But then again, we have this extra pathos of the historical situation that I was mentioning. At a time of uprootedness, of massive peasant rebellion, of destruction, of chaos, of imminent dynastic collapse, what future can be gleaned? What future can the traveler and scholar official imagine for himself, for his family, for the nation, for the dynasty? And it's an open-ended question. We know from history that the end of the dynasty was nigh, was about to take place.